Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well. Great to be here. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and you've caught us at episode 129. Great episode for you today, covering three topics, kicking off with speaking about working with diversity. And there's going to be some interesting nuggets in that, maybe things that you haven't considered before. And then we're going to be checking in with our good friends at the CPCAB. We're going to be speaking with Ray Vanderpool. I know, Rory, you met up with Ray and spoke a little bit about learning from observing. Do you want to give us a bit of taste of what we can get from our check-in?
Absolutely, Ken. And it's really interesting. CPCAB are all about researched evidence in terms of learning outcomes. And he was speaking about learning from more experienced practitioners, how we can develop, or how students can, or anybody, I guess, can develop their practice by learning from people who are a bit further down the road. And there's a lot of evidence to back this up. So it's really not to be missed. Learning by observing.
Looking forward to that one. And our final topic for episode 129, we're going to be covering the topic of data protection, how we store, manage, share data that our clients share with us. And we're going to be focusing specifically on any kind of recordings that are made. But of course, that will spill over into things like notes and things like that. So that is episode 129. So starting us off, working with diversity, Rory.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it, that when we go to train as counsellors, some of the modules in a lot of courses talk about diversity. And one of the things that sometimes we don't realise is diversity is not always apparent. So it could be that we're working with a client. I guess everybody's diverse, everybody's different, everybody's the other, because we all have our view of the world, we all have our own frame of reference. However, you could be working with a client and they could be diverse and you may not know it. And a good example of that is someone who may be gay or transgender, and you may not know because you may not be able to tell. So we have to be very, very thoughtful of our own frame of reference. We grow up and we develop in a world that kind of develops around us, and we develop our own culture. And sometimes it's useful to think about how our own cultural experience may impact on our clients.
100%. And understanding diversity, understanding where your client may be at, so important. So I can take a simple example is if somebody had mobility issues and they weren't able to maybe walk and they were wheelchair bound, that is visual. And you can put plans and actions in place, but so much, as you've quite rightly said, Rory, is not visual. And I think that message is being broadcast more and more, specifically here in the UK, with signs in parking areas and on toilets that says things like not all disabilities are visual. I don't like the word disability. I much prefer diversity because it covers so much more. Dyslexia means that the person is neurodiverse. And it's interesting because if as a counsellor we have maybe an entrance form or something we want to pick that we want a client to fill in, that may involve them reading. If we're sharing a contract, we may be saying to them, here's a copy for you, read over that and let me know what you think. If that person struggles with reading, they have some form of dyslexia, and that is not seen to us, then we're not working with that diversity. We're not working in service of the client. Neurodiversity is something that is coming to light more and more now, and that would cover things like ADHD, dyslexia, autism, all not visually apparent, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this topic is really pertinent when we come to things like people who are transitioning, people who may be gender fluid. May not always be apparent, and it might be that there's somebody in the process of transitioning. So you may have a woman sat in front of you, but it may be that they're considering transitioning into changing their gender. And sometimes we've got to be very, very thoughtful of that. I've known counsellors who've worked with someone who comes in and presents and dresses like a man one week, and the next week a woman walks through the door, and it's the same person. It's just that they've embraced their diversity. They've embraced the fact that actually they feel that they want to live their life as a woman. And it's really important that we realise that we live in a diverse world, that maybe our own experience of how we live our lives isn't enough. We need to learn about diversity. And certainly we cannot ask our clients, we cannot learn from our clients directly. We cannot say to someone, what's it like to be gay then? Just tell me a little bit about this gayness, because that's just absolutely not acceptable. We have to undertake training and CPD and gain a wider view of our world. And sometimes the messages we get, growing up may completely impact on the world we live in today. I mean, I'm 61, and when I grew up, it was illegal to be gay, if you can believe that. It was certainly illegal to be homosexual. That was the law. And now, of course, we live in a world where people can be absolutely who they want to be, and that's a great thing. But it's something that I think through training, people sometimes have to look at their own views and opinions.
100%. And just speaking about how times have changed, Rory, it wasn't that long ago where to be gay was considered an illness. And it's just incredible that it was thought of in that way when we look at what today's society looks like. You spoke about frame of reference, Rory, where you're saying that we need to be in the client's frame of reference in a counselling situation. That's what counselling is about. It's about seeing what the client is bringing from their frame of reference to try and understand that, and then empathically be there with them, standing with them within their world. And if we don't understand their world, if we don't take into consideration their diversity, and diversity has such a range, it goes from what family you were brought up, what area of the country you were brought up, what class you consider yourself in. There's so much to take into consideration to be in that client's frame of reference. And I agree with you, Rory, that the client is not there to educate us on their diversity, but it is good practice to at least invite in your contracting stage if the client wants to bring any form of diversity or difference that they may have. And you can bring that along the lines of saying, so we've gone through this contract, and I wonder if there's anything else that you feel that I should know about you for us to be able to work together better. And that kind of lays out that little carpet in a very soft way for them to bring any information that you may not have asked or may not have been covered in your contracting.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, not stereotyping. One of the things that sometimes came up when I trained counsellors was that, and certainly in work I've done when I've worked in services, where people would say, well, of course, they're going to be like that because they are, and then just add in the diversity. The idea that people may be instantly depressed because they're gay was one that has done the rounds for years. It's very possible that someone could be depressed for all the reasons that anyone else is depressed, not labelling the diversity as the problem. And you're right, Ken. I think it was 1980 when homosexuality came out of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it was only this year, 2019, that transgender was taken out of mental illness. It was being removed from the International Classification of Diseases. I think it's called the ICO. So, there still seems to be a lot of work to be done, but at least it's progress.
It is indeed. And I think you're 100% right, Rory, in not judging. And that's part of being a counsellor, a psychotherapist, is not being judgmental. But we need to look to ourselves, our own upbringing, what messages we were given as children, what we experienced as we were growing up, to understand any kind of hidden agendas that we may have that are unseen to self. And that's why personal development is so highly encouraged in counselling and psychotherapy. We need to really look at ourselves and what our relationship is with how we see the world, I guess, and how we may see someone that is different to us. A lot of work to be done on that one. And speaking of diversity, speaking about not stereotyping, I am proudly proudly an autistic man. I was born autistic. I am now 52 years old. I am still autistic. And it is unseen. And it is unseen to others. But for a lot of my journey, it was unseen to myself. I knew there were differences, or I felt that there were differences. But because the world, I guess, as such, is not open to diversity, doesn't speak about diversity a lot. It's kind of hidden, and focus is given to the masses, or those that kind of fall within the boundaries. It was missed, and today it's very different, because neurodiversity is very quickly growing. There's a lot of light being shone on that, and the people that were born with autism, there is maybe higher functioning, and higher functioning doesn't mean that they can do maths really well. Higher functioning means that there may not be the barriers of speech impairment or learning impairment that would be picked up in a child. Higher functioning means the person would appear to function, I don't want to use the word normally because I don't know what that is, but as the masses. But so much work being done on that, and they're calling autism now the lost generation. There are so many people around my age that grew up. It was never picked up. It was never recognized. It was never noticed. But I know that I think and I work differently to others, and that will play a part in the counselling room if I went into counselling.
Absolutely can. And I think as we become, certainly here in the UK, become a more relaxed society, hopefully, people can be who they want to be, and not hold back or be fearful or frightened or ashamed of being different. And in fact, it's interesting, we use the word different. Different to what? Different to normal. I think, even I fall into that trap. I think it's just being who people want to be. And thankfully, we're moving in. I think we're moving in the right direction of being a more accepting and open society. Certainly, I was thinking the other day. In fact, I was talking to a colleague. I think I was 58 before all the legislation that persecuted gay folk was repealed. 58. Can you believe that?
It's a lifetime, isn't it?
It's a lifetime.
Absolute
lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah, and the message as we kind of close this topic is it's lifelong learning, and this is kind of personal CPD for each one of us, is to keep on top of things, look at what's happening, read blogs, search the internet, understand diversity in all its shapes and forms, and open your arms widely. Open your arms widely. We accept diversity. We welcome diversity. But again, balance that off with looking at yourself. How do you feel towards diversity? Are you truly unjudgmental? It's a tricky topic. We cover it every now and again here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And I also find myself, Rory, dancing around as we're talking, not want to use words like normal and, trying to explain it in other ways, because it's just sticky topic, I guess.
It is, and I think it just reflects the conversations that wider society are having. If two therapists are kind of finding it a bit sticky to talk about, I think probably it reflects the conversations in wider society that we're now talking more about diversity, and the only way you're going to be able to fully understand it is by engaging with it. And if you meet someone who's diverse, who has a different view of the world from you, try to find out their frame of reference. Try to understand what that individual person. It doesn't mean that person speaks for everybody, but try to find out a little bit more about it, because you may find that you're more diverse than you actually think. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like where you've left that, Rory. And if you want to get involved in this conversation with fellow therapists, you can do so by just popping over to our Facebook group. Just jump onto Facebook and put in Counselling Tutor. We're right there at the top. Knock on the door, and we will let you in. And you'll be joining tens of thousands of like-minded therapists, students of counselling, psychotherapists from all around the world. We've got some tutors in there. We've got many, many supervisors in there. And this is the place where we can have these kind of conversations, and we welcome them. And we also welcome your questions. And we get questions coming in all the time, specifically relating to our friends at CPCAB. Your questions become the content of our podcast. And today, Rory, with Check-In with CPCAB, you spoke with Ray van der Poel and you spoke about learning from observing.
Yes, as I said in the intro, one of the things about CPCAB is their qualifications are research driven, and they're all about the research, those guys, for sure. When we met them, they love their research, and they were building qualifications around the latest research. And Ray was telling us, and you'll hear him speak about how watching and observing a more experienced therapist can really, really be useful for those people who may be at a kind of midpoint in their journey, or a student. And he speaks about the dreaded mistakes, something we've talked about on the podcast so many times, that it's okay to make mistakes. And actually, it's kind of a relief, certainly for students, to see someone experienced, kind of screw up, because it proves that they're human. And, it takes the pressure off, I think. It takes the pressure off. If you think, well, that person can make a mistake, then it's all right for me to make a mistake.
Let's dive straight into Check-In with CPCAB.
Check-In with CPCAB.
And it's my great pleasure to speak to Ray. So how are you doing, Ray?
Hi, Rory. Yeah, no, I'm doing really well. It's great to be on your show. How are you?
I'm very, very well. And you've got a real interesting kind of observation to make about what we can learn from research.
Yeah, this morning I was thinking a little bit about what happens in counselling courses and sessions and tutors, and I was thinking, how do we learn, and also why do we do the things that we do? And I think that's so important that we understand that whatever our practice is underpinned with some evidence. And I came across this piece of research. It's quite a recent piece, 2018, and the title's quite big, so wait for it. It's Nothing is Just Smooth or Perfect. What can students learn from intensely reviewing psychotherapy conducted by experienced therapists whilst being focused on emotional processes? So this particular piece of research it's the approach that they were looking at was emotion-focused therapy. But if we put that to one side, at the heart of this piece of research, it was around how we learn. And what they found is that the piece of research centered on students viewing an experienced therapist doing practice. And three things came from the piece of research. One, the students begin to notice emotions better, which was part of their theoretical underpinning on emotion-focused therapy. But also the second thing is that when we view experienced practitioners, we pick up on transpersonal skills. So we pick up on the therapist being empathic. And I think that's really, really interesting, is that we not only learn about our approach, but we learn about, the relationship as well. And the third thing that we learn, and this is my favorite, is that therapists make mistakes. And if I read off the research paper, it says the third point, even experienced therapists fumble. And that is so important for our students to understand, is that actually we're all human. We make mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so important. As someone who taught like yourself for a number of years, one of the things that used to happen was people used to become paralyzed by the fear of not making any mistakes, looking for perfection. As a consequence, they kind of sometimes, in very extreme circumstances, it froze. I don't know what to say. And I would say, just be yourself. It's good enough. And if you do make mistakes, that just proves that you are human.
Yeah, and having taught counselling for a lot of years, I totally get where you're coming from with students being paralyzed by having to do the skills perfectly. And I think this is a refreshing piece of research that actually states that, being in a relationship with somebody, it's not perfect, it's imperfect, and actually that is what balances that therapeutic alliance. If you think about person-centered therapy and Rogers and the trying to get rid of the power imbalance within the therapeutic relationship, that's part of it. Actually, having somebody experience you as a human being fallible is part of the process.
Absolutely. Because if they can see that you're human, it's all right for them to be human.
Yeah.
And certainly for clients who've been brought up with very strict conditions of worth, told that they have to be perfect, to see someone who's not and is just themselves, it can be quite a therapeutic kind of process in itself, I think.
Yeah, it's freeing. It's freeing. It's being accepted, Rory.
Yes, that's what I was struggling for. It's being accepted, and that for a lot of clients is a really new experience.
Yeah.
Really new experience.
And going back to this piece of research, I suppose what I would like to put out there is as counselling students, how are you being taught, and are you engaging in maybe not just listening in class, but going away, having a look online, finding pieces of experienced practitioners doing what they do, learning through watching other people use the approach that you're training in?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it on a very kind of linear level, if you were learning to play the guitar, you'd learn the chords, but you'd watch someone else playing, wouldn't you? And you'd go, oh, they've kind of dropped a chord there, or they've done it slightly differently, and you would say, I like that, or I might try that. So it's really, really important. Can I ask you a question? Do you think there's value in tutors actually giving demonstrations of counselling skills?
I think tutors are sometimes afraid of giving demonstrations. I think that for me, I always, not in every session, obviously, but I always gave students, especially maybe the higher level students. So when we're looking at level 3, level 4, because I think it can be a bit intimidating at level 2 for an experienced practitioner to go through all the skills and make it look relatively easy. That is quite scary. But certainly I think it is really good for people to view other people in practice. And it's not something you get once you've qualified. If you think about where your learning is, the other feedback that you get when you're practicing is when you're in supervision, and the supervisor is not necessarily in the room. I mean, I could go on to filming sessions and bringing that to supervision, but that's probably a whole new podcast.
It is. But yes, you are right, and I want to pick up on overwhelming students at level 2. I used to do counselling skills at level 2, and I would make a point of saying you would expect me to be reasonably competent because I'm teaching, and B, I've been doing it longer. But practice gets you there, and I used to go down very well. I think if you put yourself in a position, and if I made the odd mistake, I'd encourage the students to say, "You were a bit directive there, Rory," and I'd go, "Tell me why," and you start a discussion.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that's where a lot of the learning takes place. I think viewing somebody do that in practice, but then it's learning's always not passive. It's always an active experience. So as a student, I'd encourage the students to take notes, to note when you did certain things, so that you could ask those questions and you could say, actually, Rory, what was going through your mind when you did that? And then you might say, well, I was thinking about buying bread on the way home, or it was that was a very specific type of intervention. But whatever the reason is, I think learning is always an active experience, and seeing somebody else practice is a bit like gold dust.
You're absolutely right, and of course that links to something that I talk a lot about, which is clinical thinking. The idea of the intervention is informed by who you are experiencing in that moment. It's just not a random kind of mistake that you use a skill or that you engage. You do it with a kind of intent, reflecting back exactly where the client is, or your intervention is exactly where the client is.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You're going to get me going, Rory. It's very interesting when you look at the layers of what you do as a practitioner, because on one level you're connecting as a human being in a relationship. At another level, you're using your skills in practice, and at another level, you choosing when to use those skills because there is intention. What we do. You talked about reflection. We reflect. And we reflect again, and we reflect again. But why do we do that? What is our intention? Our intention is to gain depth rather than breadth. So if somebody's struggling with a particular issue, asking really open questions all the time, although a person-centered skill or a listening skill, it's not really helpful in gaining depth. So, this idea about when to use skills is key.
Yes. So as we come to the end of this little segment, one of the things I'm going to take away, a big takeaway, is that watching someone else practice gives us a sense of how it could be done. It gives us a sense of how we may integrate that particular way of being and way of working. It informs us. It gives us a sense of how it's done, but more importantly, it shows the very human side of the practitioner. And if there's a mistake or there's something you think, well, is that person-centered? Creates a discussion, creates a thinking point, and people can go away and integrate the outcomes and the reflection into them and their practice.
Rory, it's been such a pleasure being on your show.
Well, thank you very much, Ray.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
Always love listening to Ray.
Oh, yeah.
He explains it so articulately, and I think the points he made, certainly about observing and watching someone else's a little bit more, hone their craft a little bit more, is just so important. And as he said, the research backs it up.
Indeed it does, and definitely go through to our show notes. There's a link through to CPCAB website where you can find out more about that topic. What really stood out for me, Rory, is I observe greatly from I learn, I might say, from observing. It's my learning style is watching someone else, and it's kind of interesting. It's not always about what that person is doing. It's often about how they are doing it. It's about their way of being within that moment. And I recall my first lesson in level 2, where I started counselling, my very, very first lesson or lecture on counselling. The tutor walked in and I felt a little bit nervous. I was in this new group and I felt a little bit underconfident because I struggled with dyslexia and learning. Am I going to be able to do this? And I expected a really together person to walk in that had all the answers and knew exactly what they're doing. And the tutor walked in and struggled with the technology of getting the slide projector to work, and openly owned that, saying, oh, I can't get this technology to work. I'm always struggling with this technology. And I learned so much from observing that. It put me at ease, and it wasn't what she was doing. It was just her way of being, of owning that. So learning from observing, so very, very important. Moving on to something else that is vitally important. Whether you are a student or a practicing counsellor, data protection is something you need to have a level of expertise in, because you're dealing with data, sensitive data, your client's data all the time. Even if you're a student and you're maybe doing a simulated skills session that you might be recording to listen back on that is somebody's data, that is somebody's information that you have there, and it needs to be treated in accordance to legislation and the client's wishes, and of course your agreed contract with that client. Tell us more about data protection, Rory, and I guess we're going to focus in on things like when a client says, I want my recording or I want my notes.
Yes. It's really interesting. This was generated by a letter in the post bag, Someone wrote to me recently and said that their client had requested copies of their recording, and the question was how does that happen? Can they have it? How do I give this recording to them? What happens if it gets on YouTube? And lots of anxiety around that. And the fact of the matter is, under data protection, it's been always the case since the 90s, but I think it's a lot more defined now under the 2018 legislation, which in the UK is the General Data Protection Regulations. And in fact, it's Europe-wide, and it's been adopted in other countries as well. So if you're listening in another country, may very well be that this applies to you. And clients are able to access any of the information about them, and you have to hand it over. That's what the law says. But it does make it really interesting. If you're maybe you're qualified, and as part of post-qualification, you're studying in another modality, and your supervisor or your training group are used to listening to recordings of you working in the modality. The client can actually ask for those recordings. And here's the thing, they can ask those recordings with you on them. So you have to be very, very thoughtful. And I would say very thoughtful about making recordings. And it may be just a fact of life that some clients want to hear what they've said, and you're part of that, and you may very well have to under law hand that over. And it does give the next interesting piece for my thinking is, how do you hand it over? You know, a lot of recordings now are done electronically. I'm recording this at my end on a voice recorder, and it produces a data file. So how do you hand it over? Do you send it across the internet? In which case, you know, how do you make sure that's secured? Or probably the best way, I would say, is to put it on a USB stick or burn it onto a CD. And the key thing is that if anybody requests data, get them to put it in writing and get them to sign for any data that they've received. So that should, you know, the worst case scenario, I'm all about the worst case scenarios, Ken. Should a client decide to put your recording on YouTube, which I don't think's ever happened, but should someone want to do that, then you've got no comeback. You can say, well, I handed over this recording to them, and they are the people who've put it on, not me. So we have to be very, very careful. And I think specifically for students, because I know a lot of awarding bodies don't allow students to record clients as part of the course. They have to do their advanced skills with peers, and there's a good reason for that because of data protection and the fact that clients might access that information. If it's done in a class-based situation, the law still applies, but I guess it's within the class.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting topic when we're speaking about data protection. I think if we went back just 5 years, it would have been a very different picture. If we went back 10 years, it would be an entirely different picture of what data protection looked like. And at the time of recording this podcast, there is demonstrations happening in Hong Kong around how data is being collected without people's permission via facial recognition. Can't say it, but it's happening. Facial recognition systems. And the public are saying enough is enough. I'm drawing a line in the sand here of how much data you can collect on me. I was looking just this morning at the agreement with if you're using any kind of speech activated software like Siri or Alexa, and what rights you are giving away by using that software. And it's really interesting that the legalities involved, that they have your voice on file and can store that and can use that for research and marketing purposes. And here's the thing, you might think, oh, well, that's Google and that's Amazon and that's Apple. Those are the big companies. But you, as a counselor, as a psychotherapist, are subject to the same legislations. And it doesn't, those legislations don't kick in only when you've made notes on your client. They kick in long before that. Before your client even gets in contact with you and they visit, maybe you have a website and they visit your website. Well, already your website will be collecting data. Is it collecting cookies? Are you asking them to get in contact with you? via a contact form or email? How is that electronic communication stored and handled? There is so much to look at. And of course, with the recent introduction in Europe of GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, the law states how we should handle data, what information we need to give to people whose data we hold. And we need to be up to date on that. There's just so much more to being a counsellor. I'm thinking back to Carl Rogers' days and how much more complex it seems now with the legislation specifically around data. And I think that as we go forward, this will become more and more tricky to navigate.
Absolutely, Ken. And it's worth remembering the history of data protection. It started off with someone visiting a tip in Bristol, as I recall, if my memory serves right, to find that an NHS trust had dumped thousands and thousands and thousands of patient records in a landfill, and they were blowing through the car park people's personal medical data. And that really started, there was a huge amount of uproar about it, and rightly so. And what happened was that there was a government inquiry, and that really started the data protection kind of movement, which is just down the road. I think it's based in Wilmslow, not far from me. And now we have come to this state of affairs where lots of information is held electronically. So I produced a super duper handout on data protection and called Understanding GDPR. And all you have to do to get that super duper handout is to go to our mother website, counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab. It's podcast 129, and you can click onto a link and you will get that delivered to your inbox. So at least you've got a little overview of GDPR, absolutely essential now in the world we work and live in, and absolutely essential not only for qualified practitioners, but for students as well.
Yeah, and if you are a member of our paid-for resource, which is called the Counselling Study Resources, log in there, go to your lecture library. Rory has done a whole lecture. It's over 40 minutes just on the topic of data protection linked to GDPR. It is a must-view lecture. I often think about data protection, things like GDPR, understanding it all, implementing it as vegetables, eating vegetables. Nobody wants to eat their vegetables. Everybody wants to eat the puddings and the nice sweet things. But we have to eat our vegetables from time to time, and it's really, really well worth having a look at, because when it goes wrong, it can go horribly wrong. I also want to assure anybody that does visit our mother website, counsellingtutor.com, any information that you share with us, if you put in your email address to download Rory's super duper handout, your information is protected. We have a privacy policy which covers how that data is used. And Rory, you are our data processing officer, and you on a regular basis audit our systems and check that there's no leaks. And then you kind of file that. We keep that on file to evidence that we are protecting data. And as therapists, as psychotherapists, whether studying or qualified, same laws apply, and we need to know this stuff. It's interesting how this started, Rory. You mentioned with the client asking for their information, whether that be their notes that you have written that you hand over to them, whether that be a recording and they want that. Well, it is their information. Firstly, it should be covered in contracting, how that information is handled before you get to the point of them asking for it. So preempt that. Think about it. If a client says, I want my recording, I want my notes, what is your next response? Plan that beforehand, and keep in mind that you may have policies and procedures within your practice of how you manage and keep that data. As soon as you hand it over, you don't have any control over that, and it's worth maybe working with a client to give them a little bit of background on, if you do give them maybe your recording on a USB stick, as you quite rightly said, Rory, good idea is to maybe suggest to them, have a listen to that, get what you need from it, and then maybe you can wipe the stick so that it doesn't fall into anybody else's hands. Because I know I got a drawer here in my desk, Rory. It's got about 5 USB sticks in. I got no idea what's on those USB sticks anymore. And I guess it could very easily get lost, fall into somebody else's hands, and then their confidential information that they shared in privacy, in counselling, could be out there if they don't have, I guess, a system or structure to protect their data.
Absolutely can. And I've got up in my loft here at Counselling Towers, right at the top of the tower, I've got a bag of USB sticks that just sits there, and a number of hard drives from my computer, which are stacked up to computers I've had through the years, because I never dispose of any data that's on hardware in a tip. I store it. I wipe it off and then store the disks in the loft. Anybody would think I work for the CIA. So
I suspect it very, very strongly, Rory. And there are services, if you do have hard drives or any kind of media devices with information on, there are services where they will securely destroy those for you now. Again, as this GDPR and data protection evolves, more services are coming in to support us in that, I guess.
Absolutely. And what a great podcast this has been. We started off with working with diversity, where kind of myself discovered, not that we didn't know already, there's really no such thing as normal. Checking with CPCAB. Ray helps us with learning from observing and how that evidence-based practice can help develop our skills and enhance our ability to work with clients. And of course, it's all okay to make mistakes. And then we ended with data protection and an overview of how data should be stored, how clients should engage with that, and what our professional kind of obligations are when it comes to data. What a great podcast. And hey, stay grounded and stay safe and eat your vegetables.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.